All right, we made it to the end of the week here on the Morning Pitt at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You should know that website if you're a Pitt fan, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting, you can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, message boards with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans that you can interact with on a daily basis, all day, every day. It's a lot of fun there on the message boards. And then we have these videos that we put out at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Subscribe to that YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video while you're here. Leave a comment. We'll interact. We'll talk. We'll go back and forth. That's the fun of it. And we put these videos out every morning, Monday through Friday, just to give you some Pitt conversation topics for the day, something to talk about, something to think about, and maybe something to complain about. It's all good as long as you check it out, as long as you listen. I appreciate it for sure. Right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like and subscribe before we're done here. And it's the end of the week. Like I said, it's Friday. That means we're 1 day away from game day, although it's probably more like a day and a half. I mean, when we release this video, it's still going to be 36 hours away because of these stupid primetime kickoffs. And I really only complain about it because it just makes my night really, really late. I much prefer to have like a noon game or even a 3:30 game like the Syracuse game. When I can get done with work and with the post-game show and all that stuff at a reasonable time and watch college football. Now, it's fun to watch the games, the early games. I mean, these primetime games give us an opportunity to watch the noon games, watch the 3:30 games, not really have to worry about anything or do anything else. But I do enjoy a good noon game. I get done with work and everything around 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and I can watch whatever games are still on. And even some of the work, as we work through the evening, kind of writing recaps and whatnot of the games, we can kind of watch the late games and see what's going on in the primetime games. I mean, people who cover teams that play games at noon tomorrow are going to be able to go, they're going to be able to be finishing up their work watching Pitt, North Carolina. And this is... I think I might have said this on Wednesday night on the Panther-Lair show or maybe earlier in the week on one of the morning pits. But somebody said to me at one point this week, I was talking to someone and they said, boy, this is a big one here coming up. I said, no, actually, the big one was last week. The big game for Pitt, the real opportunity game for Pitt was a week ago when they played at Louisville. That game that we have the slideshow going there, you see photos from the game. That was the big one. This game, tomorrow night, this is the desperation game. And that's not a position you want to be in. In desperation mode, going on the road against a ranked opponent that's been scoring a ton of points. That's not the position you want to be in. But that's the position Pitt is in. And they play themselves into this position by wasting two golden opportunities. And Pat Narduzzi had an interesting quote yesterday. And I want to bring it up. I knew as soon as he said it, I knew it was going to get a lot of attention, and it absolutely did, and deservedly so. It got a ton of attention. And I'm going to bring this quote up from Pat Narduzzi. Yesterday, he sat down with the media on Thursday, as he always does. He sits down and does a kind of a final press briefing of the week. You know what I mean? And he sits down. It's more sort of low key than the Monday press conference. He usually has his weekly press conference on Mondays where he stands at the podium and we all sit out there in the chairs and ask questions from over there. And there's a microphone and all this stuff. But on Thursdays, he sits down to the conference table and he sits across from us. And we all sit around a conference table and it's a little more relaxed. I think he enjoys it. I know we enjoy it. We get more out of it, I think, for our purposes as media. And he had a quote yesterday. He was asked about just kind of the approach and, how much he's brought up with the players, how crucial this game is. That if Pitt loses this game, they end up with 3 losses in the conference already. Carolina will improve to 4-0. They're effectively 4 games behind UNC at that point, and highly unlikely to be able to catch them. And effectively killing the hopes for winning the ACC Coastal Division. And so he was asked, do you bring that up with the players? Do you talk about that? Is there a different message this week? And Narduzzi said, no, they know it's there. I don't have to spell it out for them. I don't have to write it on a piece of paper. They know how critical another game is. But then he got into the real money shot in the quote here. It says, quote, "Nobody has beat us. We have beat ourselves. That's been the message. You can say Tennessee beat us, but if we were healthy at quarterback, even with our backup quarterback, I believe we win that football game too. We have beat ourselves. Nobody has beat us. We're undefeated, really. That's how I look at it. We are. And I'll leave it at that. End quote. Now, never mind the fact that he dropped the "we are" in there. I don't think that was intentional. I think that was just sort of part of the sentiment. But this idea that in Narduzzi's mind, Pitt is undefeated. And obviously he's not. I mean, obviously he knows what the record is. He's not claiming that they are. But I understand the point that he's driving at. And it's true. Georgia Tech wasn't a better team than Pitt. I mean, they were a better team that day, but on the whole, this season, they're not a better team than Pitt. Louisville's not a better team than Pitt. I'm not sure if anyone on this schedule has more talent than Pitt, other than maybe Tennessee. At least of the 7 games they've played thus far. And the games that they lost, you can look at very specific reasons that oftentimes have very little to do with the opponent. And they are Pitt, self-inflicted wounds and self-inflicted errors and self-inflicted mistakes. Turnovers, penalties, missed field goals in a game that ends up going to overtime. And so I understand Narduzzi's point. Now, that's not to say that this team has not sort of, I think there's a lot of blame to go around. And that's probably what Pat Narduzzi's saying. The coaches and players, there's a lot of blame to go around on this team right now. But I think his point is they could have and probably should have won at least 6 out of their first 7 games, if not all 7. I guess probably the way you would say it is they should have won 6 out of their first 7 games, and they had a legitimate opportunity to win that other one. That maybe you go back and forth about saying what they should have done in the Tennessee game, but the reality is they had a real opportunity there. And they held Tennessee to their lowest points production of the season, held Tennessee to the lowest yardage production of the season. This is the number 1 offense in college football. And Pitt, I don't want to say kept them in check. They obviously gave up points and they gave up yards. But they more or less, they played as well against Tennessee as anyone has. Excuse me. And you fast forward to this week now. And you're facing a top 10 offense in North Carolina. The best offense, the most productive offense in the ACC. And you're going on the road to do it. And I think that's what we see when we look at this game. We see the best offense in the ACC going against a team that's playing like one of the worst offenses in the ACC. And while it's not going to be truly a matchup of offense versus offense, the fact remains that when you're facing a high-powered offense like North Carolina's and a quarterback like Drake May, you're going to have to go in with an assumption of needing to score points and needing to score a lot of points. And that just raises the question of whether or not this offense, this Pitt offense, is capable of it. Now, I think, and I've sort of talked about this throughout the week, and I talked about it on Wednesday night on the Panther-Lair show. I've talked about it at different points throughout the week on the Morning Pitt. I talked about it after the game on Saturday night in the loss at Louisville. I think there were signs of promise in that first half. I think there were signs of hope, reasons to be a little optimistic. Right, and there were plenty of reasons to feel bad. You know what I mean? Keaton Slovis with those 2 terrible decisions. That's a big problem. And those 2 interceptions took away at least 10 points. At least 6 minimum, and potentially as many as 14 points in a game that you end up losing by 14, 7 of which come on another turnover. That looms pretty large. But I think you got a glimpse on Saturday night, particularly in the first half, of what this offense can do when it's actually clicking. And I think there were examples of that in the first half against Tennessee. I think there were examples of that in the second half against West Virginia. This offense is not completely and fundamentally broken. I think there are fundamental flaws with this offense, and I've talked about that and written about it on Panther-Lair.com quite a bit in the last week. That this collection of talent should not be performing as poorly as it is. That these players, this quarterback, these running backs, these wide receivers, these tight ends, and this offensive line should not ever come out of a game only scoring 10 points. It defies all logic and reason. And it's not something that I'm going to give a lot of credit to the opposing defense for. I think it's entirely self-inflicted, as have been almost all of Pitt's issues and shortcomings this season. Self-inflicted. And there's almost a feeling that if they can get out of their own way and just let the offense work, let the players just work and not sort of blow up on themselves or throw up on themselves, as we're fond of saying, they can score some points. That's a question of what the ceiling is. It's a question of how many points they can realistically score. It's a question of how far they can realistically go with this offense. Can they score I mean, they did score 45 against Virginia Tech. Can they score 45 again? Can they score in the 40s again? Because they might need to. This very well could be a game where Pitt's defense plays well, and you still struggle to hold North Carolina under 30. Drake May is just that good. I was going to come on this show tonight, or this morning, and talk about Drake May, and I was going to look at Pro Football Focus. I was going to find a few things, a few vulnerabilities or weaknesses Pitt could maybe exploit, a couple areas where teams have been able to get to him. There's not a lot out there. Even in his worst games, excuse me, don't mean to shift the camera there. Sorry, I was trying to pull this paper out that has some information on Drake May. You know, he had 3 games where he's completed less than 70% of his passes. So 7 games, 4 out of the 7 he's completed more than 70%. The 3 where he threw for less than 70% of his passes, App State, he completed 66.7%, and he still threw for 352 yards and 4 touchdowns. Notre Dame, he completed 51.6% of his passes. Lowest completion percentage of the season. And he still threw 4 touchdowns and no interceptions. And then the Miami game, he completed 67.9% of his passes, so sub 70% there, 309 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. He's only thrown 3 interceptions all season, and 2 of them came in the game against Miami. How did Miami do it? What did they do? Did they find some secret elixir? Did they find some way to force Drake May into 2 interceptions and hold him below 68% completions? They only, according to Pro Football Focus, they only blitzed him 4 times. They didn't try to blitz. And they only really got pressure on him on about 11 of his dropbacks. Now, when he was under pressure, he completed 40% of his passes for 37 yards and 1 touchdown and 1 pick. But even that wasn't a reliable way to get to him. And part of the problem is he had 11 dropbacks where he was under pressure, and he only attempted 5 passes in those situations. I think only 1 of the other 6 went for a sack. So he was scrambling and getting out and running, and that's a big problem with Drake May. Not only is he number 8 in the nation in passing yards, he's running a lot too, leading North Carolina in rushing. There's just not a lot of good ways to defend a guy like this. And Pat Narduzzi was asked about, you try to confuse him. He's a redshirt freshman. He's a young quarterback. And he said, for the most part, no. You're going to stick in your base defense. You're going to do what you do because you start trying to get confusing with your coverages and start trying to mess around like that. A lot of times you just end up confusing yourself. He told a story about when he was at Northern Illinois and they played against Ben Roethlisberger at Miami of Ohio, and they tried to get all crazy with their coverages and do a bunch of different things to confuse Roethlisberger, and they just ended up confusing themselves, and Roethlisberger threw for 500 yards. So that didn't work out. Narduzzi believes in his defense, he believes in his players, and he's going to sort of stick with what they try to do, for better or for worse. And I think the expectation, I think probably among a lot of Pitt fans, is that it'll be for worse. That it's not going to turn out very well if they stick in that base defense that they like to play. But I think you have to get to him. You have to rattle him a little bit. Nobody's really been able to get to him all that consistently, partially due to the offensive scheme, partially due to Drake May's running ability and his ability to scramble and avoid pressure and get out of the pocket. But I think you still have to try and get after him. And you have to try and get hits on him. You have to try and get him rattled a little bit. That might be your best way to disrupt this passing game. You'll try to disrupt the timing on the outside. You'll try to press those receivers and try to throw them off their routes and get them off their marks and get Drake May to maybe wait a little longer than he's comfortable waiting. And ideally you force him to make a throw he doesn't want to make because your pressure gets home. I mean, that's how it's supposed to work. I'm not really sure I'm not really sure how effective that can be or how consistently effective that can be, but that's probably what Pitt's going to try to do. I don't see them trying to do anything too drastically different from what they typically do. They're going to try and get after him. They're going to try and disrupt the timing on the outside, and they're going to hope that they can force him into some bad decisions. Obviously, and this is basic football 101, if they can get some turnovers, that would be huge. And that might be this might be the kind of game where not necessarily that you either, go back and forth, turnover, touchdown, but you do need to be able to offset a few of those touchdown drives with, a few turnovers. And that's, this defense, I think, has put itself in position for turnovers this season. They haven't always gotten it. They got one at Louisville, and it was a big one. I don't think they cashed in on it, but it was a big turnover in that situation, and they're going to need some of those tomorrow night. Drake May's only thrown 3 all season, so it's going to be tough. This is a big challenge. I mean, this is the best quarterback, probably your ACC Offensive Player of the Year, probably your ACC Player of the Year, and a guy who, coming into next season is going to have Heisman hope, Heisman hype and Heisman hopeful and all that. Is going to be a challenge. You just got to be able to slow him down enough to give your offense a chance to play through it. Now, North Carolina's got the worst defense, statistically the worst defense in the ACC. They give up a lot on the ground. They give up a lot through the air. They give up a lot of points. They give up a lot of total yards. I mean, pretty much every statistic you look at, they're at the bottom of the conference. So, you should be able to move the ball on them. And as we pointed out, as we've said a bunch of times, they moved the ball in Louisville in the first half. They moved the ball well. They just sunk themselves with turnovers. They had 3 drives that ended in turnovers. They weren't 3 drives that went 3 and out. There were 3 drives that ended in turnovers, and I think there is some saving grace in that. I think there is something sort of redeeming in that because they were able to move the ball, and they did it with a mix of run and pass. They weren't just handing it off, although they might be able to move the ball downfield just handing it off in this game tomorrow night. But I think Izzy Abanikanda's talent, the threat of Izzy Abanikanda should open up opportunities to throw. And throw in the way that they were throwing on Saturday night. Gavin Bartholomew, Daniel Carter. Hopefully he can play. I think he got banged up in the Louisville game. I don't think he really played much after a certain point in that game. It seemed like he came out, which is unfortunate because he actually. I was looking at some snap counts here. I mean, that game at Louisville was like maybe the most active he's been almost all season. He played 13 snaps on offense against West Virginia. He played 16 at Western Michigan in that game where they were just running all the time. And he played 25 against Rhode Island. The next 2 games, Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech, he played 11 total snaps. And so he, and then he played 14 at Louisville, but again, came out early. I think that was on track to be his most productive game, which after losing Jaden Bradley and having some short numbers at wide receiver, it made sense to go with more, 2-back personnel with Abanikanda and Carter back there. But getting the ball to those guys, you know what I mean? Working the flats, working the shorter stuff, working 8-yard passes. I love that, and I think it's a great way for this offense to operate as you offset the running game with that. And then eventually you start loosening up and getting some of those opportunities to look downfield when they're so caught up trying to stop your run and trying to stop the passes to Gavin Bartholomew in the flat and trying to stop the wheel routes and things like that. And when they finally honed in on that, when they are committed to stopping those things, then you've got opportunities to take shots to Konate Mumfield and Jared Wayne and Jalen Barton, who Pat Narduzzi said Jalen Barton will play a lot this week. He said he'll start. I mean, we'll see what the starting lineup is. It seems awfully early for Narduzzi to be convinced about that. But, that's a guy who can go downfield. That's a guy who can be a deep threat if the coverage is right and if the situation is right. And they should be able to force Carolina into giving them opportunities downfield. And if all that works, if the running game works, which it should, if some of the short passing game, the quick game work, which it should, and if some of those deep downfield opportunities open up, which they very well could, I mean, there's a chance here for Pitt. There's a chance to go on the road against a ranked opponent and win. There's a chance to score enough to have a chance, to possibly win like 35-24 game, 38-31 game. I mean, I think that's a very realistic possibility. I'm not ruling Pitt out in this game at all. What did the line open at? Like 2.5 or something like that? I think Las Vegas is probably just trying to get people to hammer North Carolina, the ranked opponent, playing at home against a team that just scored 10 points a week ago. And so they only make a -2.5? Raises some eyebrows. I think the line has moved this week because a lot of money came in on North Carolina, but it raises some eyebrows. And you wonder if maybe Pitt should have a better chance in this game than I think most of us who watch and follow the team are giving them. There's a path to winning this game. There's a way to do it. And it's a path sort of forged by things Pitt has done at different points over the course of the season so far. They just have to do it all together in one game. And it would be a huge one if they could pull it off. All right, what else is going on in the ACC this weekend, or particularly the Coastal Division this weekend? Looking at Saturday, bunch of noon games. Notre Dame is at Syracuse. Is that game actually playing? Yeah, that game is being played at Syracuse. It's not at like Yankee Stadium or someplace. Big opportunity for Syracuse there. I mean, even if Notre Dame is 4-3 and not really looking very good this season, if a win over Notre Dame is a win over Notre Dame, and if it pushes you to 7-1, that's even more impressive. Boston College is at UConn. Don't care about that game. Georgia Tech at Florida State. And this is it's an interesting game to me because I think Florida State's an interesting team. I think they've got talent. They've obviously stumbled a few times this season. But this is a game that they should win. Georgia Tech should fall to 2-3 in the ACC and effectively be eliminated from division contention at that point. Kind of along the same lines. 12:30 game, Miami at Virginia. Virginia's already 1-3. I think once you get to 3 losses in the ACC, you are pretty much out of it for the division. You won't be mathematically eliminated. Virginia's not mathematically eliminated yet. If Georgia Tech loses tomorrow, they're not going to necessarily be mathematically eliminated. But for all intents and purposes, I don't think 5-3 wins the Coastal Division. I think 6-2 is a reliable record to shoot for, and I think somebody will get to 6-2. I don't think 5-3, unless North Carolina completely collapses, I don't think 5-3 is going to win the Coastal. And so Miami sitting at 1-2 in the ACC, going on the road to Virginia, struggling as they are. I mean, they're in real danger of being, for all intents and purposes, eliminated. Already sitting at 3-4 overall, 1-2 in the conference. Tyler Van Dyke, I think what was hurt in the last game. I don't know what his status is. I haven't looked to see if he's expected to play this week. But I mean, even if he is, that Miami team has been so up and down, so inconsistent. And if they lose, if they fall to 3-5, they fall to 1-3 overall, or 3-5 overall, 1-3 in the ACC. It's still Miami. And there's, even with a new coach, there's still a possibility of sort of collapse and quitting. And we'll see if that's what happens to this Miami team. They're playing at Virginia. They should win that game. Virginia's bad. They're 1-3 already. They're pretty much out of it. If they lose that game, they're 1-4. I mean, I forget if they already played North Carolina. But if they did and they lost, they would be mathematically eliminated, assuming Carolina wins on Saturday night. But I mean, Virginia's out of it. They're not going to win the Coastal. That's pretty much a done deal. But if they could find a way to beat Miami, then I would expect Miami to mostly fall apart. And then the nightcap, Pitt at North Carolina. Duke is off this week, so they don't have a game, but Pitt'll close it out at North Carolina. One mid-afternoon game, Wake Forest at Louisville. Wake is -4. That should still be the way that goes. Wake Forest should be able to pull off the win on the road. They're a top 10 team right now. They're 6-1 overall. Oh, there's the line. Carolina right now is -3, it looks like, with an over-under of 65. I don't know what I would bet on that, but I might bet the over. I might take over 65. I wouldn't be surprised if both of these teams get into the 30s. And if they do get into the 30s, I think Pitt's got a real chance. I think if Pitt can score in the 30s, they're going to have a real shot to win this game. I really do. And it's just, like I say, it's just about doing these things that they've done well and doing them consistently for the over the course of a game. Without 3 turnovers, they win the game at Louisville. Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. Georgia Tech has things you can point to in the same exact way, and even the Tennessee game, there are things you can point to and say, wow, without that, they win. But they didn't, and they made those mistakes in those games. They had those errors in those games. They fell apart in those games, and they lost as a result of it. They need to find a way to rally for this game because this is a desperation game. This team cannot go 4-4. I think there's. I think there are a lot of negative outcomes that can come with going 4-4, and I'd be concerned to see what happens. Aside from just the massive disappointment of following the ACC championship with a 4-4 start to the next season. But we'll see. We'll see what this team is capable of. I think I know what they're capable of. We just haven't seen them do it. What we have done is 5 days of Morning Pitt episodes. It's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate everybody who tuned in for these things. I really do. Make sure you like and subscribe while you're here. Like this video. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It would be very appreciated. And, when you subscribe, turn on notifications. That way you get an alert sent to your phone when we go live. That'll come in handy tomorrow night when we go live after the Pitt, North Carolina game for our Panther-Lair post-game show. You're going to want to tune in for that. I think win or lose, it's going to be a lively discussion. And we don't know what time we're going to start. I'm saying around midnight sometime, but the Louisville game, I thought it'd be around midnight. It ended up being around 11:45. If you want to make sure you don't miss it, turn on notifications. You'll get an alert whenever we start to go live, and that way you'll know when it's happening. So youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, subscribe, turn on notifications, like this video, and then check out the website Panther-Lair.com for all our coverage of the Pitt, North Carolina game throughout the weekend. Panther-Lair.com. Thanks everybody who watched these videos all through the week. Hope you had a great week. Hope you're in line for a great weekend. Enjoy your Friday, and we will talk to you tomorrow night after the Pitt, North Carolina game for the Panther-Lair post-game show right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.